Hey guys, Steven here, Fanatic Perspective. So y'all see, not even 24 hours ago, I dropped a video, what's taking so long with the staff hires, and here we go. So it looks like Tom Herman in Texas has answered at least half of our questions. Chris Ash now defensive coordinator here at the University of Texas. Before I get into breaking down the hire and my initial reaction, I want to give out a shout out to our sponsors at Boss's Ranch. Guys, phenomenal product. I had some pizza last night. Enjoyed some of the Red River Ranch. Phenomenal product, as y'all are starting to realize. More and more of you need to go check it out, especially those of you who are here in Central Texas. Check them out. HEB, Cold Produce, Boss's Ranch, phenomenal product. So Chris Ash is in the building now, guys. And initial reaction, and I've had, I've actually spoken about Chris Ash since before you, when the word came down he was going to join Texas as an analyst during the season when he was fired from Rutgers. And then when we made the video a couple weeks ago regarding Todd Orlando's firing, and I said I was kind of meh on Chris Ash, I've warmed up to it a little bit, just learning more about his time as a defensive coordinator at Wisconsin, Ohio State, and some of the things that, some of his core principles and whatnot. In terms of just my personal initial reaction, meh. I'm okay with it. I think meh is a little disrespectful. I'm okay with it. Especially when you look at the folks that are off the board and the clock is ticking, trying to wrap up recruiting. We also have another window of recruiting after early signing day when we're going into February, and some guys like Akili Ringo may be holding off their commitment. So it would behoove us to start to have a staff in place and evaluate current coaches or position coaches we need to bring in. So in this video, I'm just going to go down some of the pros and cons I have of the hire as we know it right now. I don't think we can fully grade. Obviously we can't grade the hire until, we have football, right, played. But I think we can diagnose or break some things down once the full staff is in place. But just in terms of what we know from Chris Ash and him coming in to Austin, what are some of the pros and what are some of the cons, right? So before I get into that, I also want to say, whether you agree with the hire or you disagree with the hire, I feel like we're doing a poor job right now on social media as fans of calling each other idiots and whatnot, or saying people are misinformed if they have a certain opinion of Chris Ash. Now, especially if that person has valid points or valid reasons, or they have just another candidate in mind, and that person says, hey, I don't prefer Chris Ash, or even if that reason is something along the lines of what we'll talk about later in terms of a comfort hire. This whole thing of, throwing people aside and their opinions, it's kind of childish to me. And so if we start to see some of that, engage in that in terms of this channel or on Twitter or whatever, then, I tend to be more dismissive of folks like that, because I'm seeing a lot of that out there right now. Even folks that are very excited about Chris Ash coming on board. There's a lot of good football people, a lot of breakdowns you're seeing that I've seen over the last couple of weeks of people excited about Chris Ash and breaking down the X's and O's of how he can help Texas. And people are like, comfort hire, and, dismiss him. So I think we just have to, I just wanted to throw that anecdote in there before we got into some of the pros and some of the cons. So obviously one of the pros is the Ohio State. He was the co-DC with Luke Fickell, Ohio State's national championship run. I believe he was there, between 2014 and 2015 before he got the head coaching job at Rutgers. So that is, anytime you have national championship experience and you have, coached some of the great players that he did during that time, including Joey Bosa on the defensive line and some of the other greats like Avon Bell at the time, who's now with the New Orleans Saints. So when you look at the run that they had, and specifically folks around the secondary, very, very impressive. Now, was he the defensive play caller, so to speak? From what I've gathered, he was not. But that in terms of just being around that culture, and doesn't still mean that he wasn't involved in scripting game plans, and more importantly in terms of how it relates to Texas, helping with those fundamentals and breaking down position groups that is much needed here with our guys. I like the fact that he has background coaching secondary. That's kind of his strength, really around the safeties. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong, I believe he's a former safety himself, but that's kind of been his niche, and as a position coach and moving up the ranks as a defensive coordinator. So moving from Todd Orlando, who's more of a linebackers guy, and you saw that play out when he had good linebackers and when we had the dip, right? So now with the marriage of our talent and all the guys we've brought in, the BJ Fosters, the Caden Stearns, the Overshones, Chris Brown, all those guys under the tutelage now of a Chris Ash, and that being his forte, so to speak, I think that bodes well for us maximizing their potential. Earlier thing I referenced in terms of coaching up position groups and focusing more on fundamentals sounds to me, now Chris Ash playing out of more of a base 4-3 quarters look, more focus on fundamentals, not necessarily beating you with scheme, and a lot of the manipulation stuff that Todd Orlando was known for out of his 3-3-5 and trying to disguise stuff and tried to play chess. This may be more of a watered down basic checkers look, but Chris Ash's emphasis on tackling. And we heard this too with Tom Herman. I think that's why he's leaning this direction. One of the biggest things he talked about at the end of the season was player development and guys not playing up to their speed, not playing up to their time speed. We have 4-4 guys who are not able to diagnose things, and they're playing like a 4-6, 4-7 guy. Now, if you're able to slow things down enough and it's more read and react and see ball, hit ball, you're going to be able to get guys playing fast and up to speed. So that's a pro here. In theory, all this is in theory, right? But in theory, from what we know about Chris Ash, the emphasis is on the fundamentals, on tackling, on playing man coverage, in terms of, because whether you're in a zone or a man, you're playing man once you match up within the zone. So man is man, right? So learning how to, turn your hips, learn to turn your head, playing the ball appropriately. We've had issues with that at Texas for I don't know how long. No matter what corners have been back there, we have failed time and time again to properly utilize technique and finding the football. Hopefully, if those two things alone, if he's able to correct that and some of the persistent tackling issues we've seen here, just off those two things alone, we should be much improved from what we've seen and trying to get back to at least the type of defense we saw even in 2017. The other thing, some of the other pros I have here, reputation as a good recruiter. And I think that's important because some would argue that Todd Orlando struggled a little bit in terms of recruiting. Now, those on the staff have done a very, very good job. And Brian Carrington and even Jason Washington, Oscar Giles have a lot to do with that. Again, we'll see who sticks around underneath Chris Ash. But, having that reputation from other programs coming in as a good recruiter is very, very helpful. I don't know about his Texas ties and how he can help us in state, but I think the recruiting thing, we'll have to circle more back to that when we know what the staff is going to look like. That's going to be very, very important. I also would implore Tom Herman to consider balancing the staff a little bit more and not just having 4 defensive coaches. Maybe bumping that up to 5 or 6, whatever he's comfortable with. Now, I know that's also going to play into, who the OC is going to be and how, but ultimately, that's Tom Herman's decision. I would like to see the defensive staff a little bit more balanced. I think that would also, if you get some of the more names in here, especially a real special teams person that's going to coach one of these defensive positions, I think that will excite some people within our fan base that are, kind of very skeptical of Chris Ash. Let's just be real about that. Pro. So I have a couple things that are pros and cons. Pros is familiarity in terms of a working relationship with Tom Herman. Look, we'll get into the comfort hire stuff, I promise, at the end of the video, but you do have a relationship with somebody who y'all won together at Ohio State. Now, granted, that was under the Urban Meyer umbrella, and I know we're going to have our normal Urban Meyer people come on here that are like, clock's ticking, I'm waiting for him. But when you look at their working relationship, I think that is a positive. Now, I'll get to the cons of that. The other pro/con I have is familiarity with Big 12 offenses. Chris Ash has an advantage of being in the building and being here as an analyst, at least through our majority of our Big 12 schedule. He was in the room of preparation. I don't know what input he had to the game plan. I don't know if he gave input to Todd Orlando and Todd Orlando said, I'll go a different direction. I don't know. But what I do know is that he was in the room and he does now have familiarity with how these Big 12 offenses are deployed, some of the tendencies and schematically what some of these coaches like to do, because he was involved in the preparation this season. So having taken a look at that, even though he has a completely different scheme, he can step back and say, kind of chart everything. I think that's an advantage for him moving forward as he kind of figures out how he wants to attack this conference as a defensive play caller next season in 2020. So those are my pros for Chris Ash, and that's a good bunch. I now, even in some of the, I may have dumbed down some of the 4-3 quarter stuff. He does like to blend in the cover 2 and a little bit of cover 3 on third downs when they want to get a little bit more aggressive. But it's really more of trying to keep things in front of you, let your athletes be athletes, let's rally the ball and tackle and play fast. Just wants to play fast. So how that looks in the Big 12 though versus how that looked in the Big 10, it's two different animals. All right. So that's where the familiarity will come in, and we'll break that down now with the cons. Now, some of the cons right off the bat. A lot of co-titles in his past, whether it was Wisconsin, Ohio State, and now in the case of Wisconsin, I've heard people from Wisconsin argue that, hey, we got better as a defense when Dave Aranda took over, right? Now, we're also going back in time because that's like 2010, 2011 time frame. So how applicable that is almost 9 years later, I don't know. For me personally, the Rutgers thing does matter. I see a lot of people being very dismissive of his head coaching record and his time at Rutgers. Look, I'm from the Northeast. I'm very familiar with recruiting and how things go up and down, that region out through New Jersey, New York, and where they get a lot of their kids out in terms of Pennsylvania and in the DMV. 8-32 is terrible, all right? And we've seen people have some moderate success at Rutgers, like a Greg Schiano, who ended up being later on the defensive coordinator at Ohio State, right? So when you lose like that and you have the defenses where they were ranked, that imprint does matter in terms of his influence on the defense, his influence on whether he was a defensive player caller or not. I understand as a head coach you have a lot of different responsibilities. I also understand that there are guys who are really, really good coordinators and crappy head coaches. Get all that. Resume matters. And when we're talking about, and the reason why this matters, because of two things. Because the biggest criticisms is that and the comfort hire, right? The potential of, Tom Herman, did he do his due diligence going far and wide to find the best to be here, the best he could find? Now, that does not account for if somebody told him no, or if several people told him no, or if people are utilizing Texas to get raises in their current positions, or they felt that Tom Herman's job really is on the line and they didn't feel comfortable coming here to Texas. So the perception matters here, right? Because fans are like, well, we're almost settling for a guy that's already in-house, right? And so I understand the feel of that as well. And that's some of the emotions I have, but again, some of the pros kind of help me somewhat out of that. Now, as an analyst, he was here when the defense was struggling. So if we're going to give him credit for being here and diagnosing, and that's why I had those familiarity things there too, he also does not have familiarity, as a guy calling a defense against a Big 12 offense. I think that's a little different than charting stuff. I also think you were here, and what did you help us fix when you got here? Because our defense took a turn for the worst, and you were in the building, right? Now, I don't know how much or how little you had to do with anything, and that's going to be one of the things that only Tom Herman knows, right? But it is a concern. Another con I have is, what are the linebackers going to look like in this new scheme, and does he have the personnel to go immediately to some of the base stuff that he wants to do, right? Many people have come on this channel and clamored for the four-man front. I think we'll get that under Chris Ash. But from a linebacking perspective, the responsibilities change in that scheme. Do we have the personnel to run that? Can Deli just be your middle, plug in as your middle linebacker and do the things that a middle linebacker needs to do in that type of scheme? I'm assuming your will is going to be Joseph Osai. How does all this look? Do we have the personnel currently here, or is this something now where we're going to have to hit up the portal, look at a grad transfer or whoever to come in and fill some of those spots? Is it something where guys start to have to change positions? I still think there's a lot of uncertainty here as we look at this hire right now, present day, right? So I think the linebacking coach, and shout out to Bill who was asking me about that on Twitter, I think we'll have to really figure out who that linebacking coach is going to be, because from a defensive line standpoint, with the recruits we have coming in, they'll be able to play in this scheme no problem. Prince Dorbah can translate into this. Vern Brocken can translate into this. So I'm not worried about, and even the guys we currently have, on our team right now, I don't see an issue there. More of my concern is just how these linebackers are going to look. My bigger things that I'm worried about. First off, is this an upgrade over Todd Orlando? Let's be honest. And the reason why I ask that is because we've seen, again, history, because this is going to be the second thing, history is not on the side of Tom Herman right now. When you start looking at Texas coaches in the history of Texas that have fired coordinators, it hasn't really ended well too often, right? And when we're looking at Todd Orlando, and I know all the criticism, I'm not going to go back, because, again, I liked Todd Orlando, and I thought he deserved one more year. But is this a sound upgrade over Todd Orlando, or is this one of those things where we struck out with several other candidates, and now we have to come back to Chris Ash, who may be even, right? That's a concern. And I think that's something where we have to kind of keep in the back of our minds. Now, Chris Ash is here, and this is the other thing I want to say. Chris Ash is here now. He's a Texas Longhorn. He's been a Texas Longhorn, but now he's our defensive coordinator and going to be heavily involved with building out our defense and recruiting our defense. I'm rooting for him. I want him to succeed. I think sometimes people get caught up in trying to be right more than rooting for success in the situation. You guys that have watched this channel, that follow my Cowboys content, UT content, whatever, I can be right as rain about some things, and I can be wrong as hell about other things. But I always remain consistent, and I'm never going to be that guy to be like, I'm not trying to be that I told you so guy. I'd rather much be like, wow, I learned something new. Y'all proved me wrong. That's my energy, because I want Chris Ash to work. All those pros he's the guy now. I'm not the one making the decisions, but he's the guy now, and we need this to work. I need Tom Herman to be the guy. I don't need him making comfort hires. Now, I also think it's my responsibility, if I'm going to be on YouTube covering the team, to call out things like that when I see him and call it and keep it 100. And I think I'm doing that. But at the same token, it's like, we need this to work. I want to win, period. And we need it to work. I need Chris Ash to be the goods and show us why he was a national championship co-defensive coordinator at Ohio State. So the familiarity angle, like I said before, hasn't called, plays against a Big 12 defense. That could be a big deal. Alex Grinch, I don't know what his familiarity was with Big 12, but he came in and brought in new wrinkles and turned Oklahoma around like that. So hopefully we can get the same thing from Mr. Ash. Now, the other thing, too, is we're in win now mode, right? We don't have time for, we got to get guys in here that fit this scheme, or we don't, this guy doesn't fit what we're trying to do. No, it has to evolve. So as much as it is around, 4-3 or whatever, at the end of the day, the things I'm focused on is can we get the fundamental things cleaned up and get guys playing fast, whatever we deploy, right? Baylor runs again, where they run the 3-3-5, but everybody seems to know what they're doing. They play fast as hell, right? Other teams like Oklahoma, they deploy a 4-man front. They have a traditional rush. They play fast as hell. However you want to do it, I don't care. I think, again, we as fans get caught up in those things too much as well. But going back to the history comment I made, history's not on our side here. Like Fred Akers, David McWilliams, Mac Brown, I think, and even Charlie Strong fired OCDC, right? And so at this point, Charlie, I don't think did it in the same offseason. I think it was, he fired Vance Bedford midway through, and then eventually took over with Brian Jean-Marie. But it has to be one of those things where, as Tom Herman, you want to be sure that if, with everything on the line, that this is your guy, and here we are, right? And so how the staff comes together is going to be very, very important so they can get on the right side of history, because UT history is not on their side with the current situation that we're in. So I'm curious to get everybody's feedback. I know we're going to have folks that feel like this is a comfort hire. Tom Herman is just trying to get guys in here, not have real conflict in the meeting room like some of us wanted. Some people like me wanted somebody from the outside just to kind of shake things up. But Chris Ash is more than qualified. And like I said before, and I'll conclude on this, I'm rooting for him to do a great job here at Texas. I hope I'm wrong. I really hope I'm wrong in terms of, when I say I hope I'm wrong in terms of my almost apathetic nature to the hire and just the lack of, excitement that it generated. Now, I'm not saying it's to the point of where I was with Tim Beck when they hired him, because I had seen a lot of Tim Beck as an OC at Nebraska and Ohio State, and I could see that he was going to struggle here at Texas. As great as a recruiter as he's been, I could see on the field where the struggle would be. I don't think we're at that point with Chris Ash at all. But at the same token, when you put out this energy to your fan base that we're going to search far and wide for the most, the best defensive minds, and we settle for somebody that's already in the building, this is some of the discussion we'll have and why it's so polarizing. So guys, that's all I got. We'll be back with a live. Want to get Tran's thoughts on this. So probably do something maybe even tomorrow or Tuesday with the live discussion, so we can get everybody's feedback as we digest this. But whether you're excited about the hire, whether you're very skeptical of it, or you're kind of like me where you're just like kind of in the middle, love to get everyone's thoughts. And appreciate all the support of the channel. Make sure you guys subscribe and share with other fellow fans. Love to get all fans' comments on here as well. So appreciate you guys. Horns always up.